Kathleen, could you please turn off your light? Because it just feels like you look like a shadow because of the reflection. Much better, thank you.
Muy buenos días, bienvenidos al Foro Internacional Desafíos
Good morning. Welcome to the International Forum on the Challenges of the Energy Sector after the pandemic, organized by OSINERMIN. Today we have experts from different regulating associations and organisms. Our panelists will be organized in two discussion tables with discussing about two main topics, universal access to energy and energetic transition. We will have simultaneous interpretation both in English and Spanish. You just have to select your interpretation option at the bottom of your screen and select the language of your preference. In order to start our event, I would like to welcome Engineer Jaime Mendoza Gacon, Chair of the Board of Directors of OSINERMIN. Good morning, Engineer Mendoza. Good morning. From Lima, Peru, we would like to welcome all the participants of this significant event that will help us exchange experiences and expectations about energy aspects for the citizenry of our nations. Um, Energy is a pillar of modern economy. They are responsible for the development of several activities that we acknowledge as essential, like health, systems, education, and education. Thanks to the transversal character of energy, the international community considers as one of the objectives of the Agenda 2030 of the United Nations this important element. The COVID-19 emergency has also made it possible for energy planners and regulators to face different challenges in terms of access and transition, energy transition agendas. In that regard, we would like to thank all the representatives for their presence in this discussion. And Ming is ready to contribute to the global community of regulators, especially in the framework of such an special date for our country, like our bicentennial anniversary. So let's use this space in order to talk about the challenges of the energy sector and to work together for solutions that will contribute to the development of our sector in an accelerated and efficient fashion in order to meet the demand of the new global demands. It is a reason for pride to me to share these spaces for dialogue. I would like to thank the representatives of the regulating agencies that are joining us today.
All over the world for joining us
Quisiera
today. I wish us a very productive day. Thank you.
Muy bien, muchísimas gracias,
Thank you very much, Engineer Mendoza. Now, so we are going to talk about the challenges and uh, uh, what can we expect from the energy sector in the future. So now we are going to, well, I have to tell you that OSINERMIN is the supervising agency for investment in energy and mining in Peru. And now we're going to show you a video so that you can learn more about our institution and the services it provides to our citizenry. For 23 years, OSINERMIN has proven its technical capacities. It supervises the energy and mining sectors so that their activities are developed in safe conditions for the citizenry. Supported by technology deployment and the expertise of its disciplinary teams, OSINERMIN supervises the energy and mining industry, regulates electrical and natural gas rates. It provides adequate guidance to citizens and impartially solves their claims. The global COVID pandemic has accelerated the transformation. It has intensified the use of drones for supervising the energy sector. to capture high quality imaging of the energy infrastructure, like generation plants and transmission lines. Views of natural gas and LPG structures, as well as mining facilities located in remote or rugged terrain areas. Likewise, new technological applications were developed and strengthened that are available for the authorities in order to provide a better service that protects consumer rights. Osinerming also contributes to guarantee the security of the liquefied petrol gas. It now supervises 100% of the tanks for LPG, and it has proposed a total reform of this market. Osinergmen has also strengthened its relations with international organizations in the energy and mining sectors through the exchange of good practices. And in the framework of its international projection, it has organized the 8th World Energy Forum 2023, one of the most important activities that are part of the bicentennial schedule of Peru. We are a Sinigmin, energy that never stops. Let's work together towards the bicentennial. So we start with block number 1, universal access to energy. In this group, we have representatives from Brazil, the United States, Turkey, Peru, Zambia, and the Bahamas. Block 1 will be moderated by Kathleen Riviere. She is the chair of the Women's Initiative in Energy at the Energy Regulators Confederation, and she is the executive secretary of the Organization of Caribbean Utility Regulators. Kathleen has more than 20 years of experience in utilities regulation before her promotion as executive director of the ERCA, the Utilities Regulation and Competition Authority. Kathleen is a accountant, and she's a graduate. She graduated from the University of Acadia in Nova Scotia, Canada. Kathleen, please, you have the floor.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, based on where you are in the world. I am honored to moderate this panel discussion on universal energy access today. The United Nations Sustainable Development Goal 7 talks about affordable and clean energy, and energy includes electricity as well as cooking fuel. Today we have a distinguished panel of gentlemen who will be talking about universal energy access, and I will introduce them in alphabetical order according to their associations. So first we have Mr. Andre Pepitone de Nobrega from the Association of Regulatory of Iberia and American Entities. We have Mr. David Danner, who is the president of the National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners of the United States of America. Mr. Hassan Oskek, who is the Deputy Secretary General of the Mediterranean Energy Regulators. Mr. Edwin Quintanilla, who is the Energy Supervision Manager for Peru's regulatory agency, which is OSINAGME. And finally, we have Mr. Elijah Shikone, who is the Executive Secretary of the Regional Electricity Regulators Association of Southern Africa, RERA. Gentlemen, welcome. The presentation will start with 3 rounds of questions from me, and then the final round, the 4th round, will be where I can ask the panelists additional questions, or panelists can ask each other additional questions. So without further ado, I will start with the first round of questions, and I will start with Andre. And the first question, your first question is, what were the biggest challenges Ibo-America energy regulators face due to COVID-19, and what are the challenges for universal access to energy?
Thank you, Kate. Estimados debatedores e amigos de Ocur, Icer, Medrag, Osinermin e Herrera, espero que vocês e suas
I
famílias
hope that you and your families and friends are all in good health.
em nome de meus colegas de painel,
On behalf of my colleagues, Kate, David, Hassan, Edwin, and Elijah, I would like to greet you all from the capital city of Brasilia in Brazil. Um, we are now facing a very big challenge. I am very glad to participate in this international forum on with other 27 regulators and also as part of the area, the Ibero-American Association of Energy Regulators. Well, in order to answer this question, in this moment of uncertainty caused by this health, social, and social crisis, we understand that no country and no economy and no society um, is free from the consequences of the pandemic. The area has specified its encounters in order to look for short, mid, and long-term solutions that can inspire regulating measures for the reactivation, the economic reactivation of our countries. In the short term, we have taken measures in order to guarantee the continuity of the energy services, accessibility of energy, and the feasibility of companies. Um, the energy regulators led and participated in creating emergency measures centered on the immediate threats to the functioning of energy services. And we discussed issues like the continuity of service, the increase of in the number of vulnerable consumers, and the safety in energy sectors. We were we we prioritize the critical services through initiatives designed to provide support to the consumers. From the beginning of the health crisis, the regulated markets and their governance have shown a high degree of resilience. And this has illustrated the capacity of regulators in order to carry out agile and innovative actions from which we can obtain lessons towards a more flexible regulation for the period after the crisis. Now, looking towards the future, we understand that believing is fundamental, but it is also very important to achieve a growth in quality. We have to design a recovery process that prioritizes people, first of all, so that this can be inclusive in order to reach especially that 2% of the Latin American population that hasn't had access to electricity yet. In order to make this sustainable, it is important to highlight the importance of renewable sources of energy. And third, prosperity has to be resilient. We have a big opportunity in our hands. This opportunity is given to us by this period of recovery in order to build a better future. That would be my answer.
Andre, thank you very much. Moving right along, Mr. David Danner. What measures have some of the NARUC members implemented to ensure that energy access was available for all during the pandemic?
Good morning, Kathleen. Thank you for the question. I want to echo a lot of what Andre said this morning, because I think we are all dealing with similar challenges as we deal with this health and social crisis. In the United States, we have 54 different states and territories, and they did not all address the matter in the same way. In my state of Washington, we first, as you recall, when the crisis first came upon us, many businesses were forced to close. We did not know how deep or how long the pandemic was going to last, but we had to make sure that electrical utilities and that the line workers who work for those plants were all deemed to be essential workers so that they could continue to provide service throughout the pandemic. And so they were exempt from many of the early prohibitions. In Washington, we went almost immediately to the utilities that we regulate, and we asked for voluntary commitments from the utilities that they would not disconnect any customer for non-payment and would not assess any late fees or interest on unpaid amounts. The governor later issued a proclamation making this legally binding, and that moratorium has been renewed several times in 2020 and 2021. He also issued a moratorium on evictions for non-payment of rent and for disconnections of water. In the meantime, we have established tariffs that set aside money to assist customers who were put in financial difficulty by the pandemic. And combined with state and federal financial assistance to those customers, we currently have enough money to cover all of the arrearages. We have required utilities to offer payment plans to customers so that those who do not qualify for financial assistance can pay back over time and not have to pay it all at once. Many other states have had similar moratoriums. The National Regulatory Research Institute compiled a map of all the states and found that of the 50 states, 14 had active moratoria, 17 had moratoria that have already expired, and 17 had voluntary moratoria. So we are still in progress. Of course, the pandemic is still with us, even though we have largely opened up our economy again. We still have the economic fallout from what we have experienced in the last year and a half, and that continues. But we're looking out to ensure that electricity is safe and affordable, and we are going to continue along those lines. So thank you, Kathleen, for the question.
Thank you very much, David, for that response. Hassan, what lessons have been learned as a result of COVID-19 and universal energy access in MedReg?
Thank you, Kathleen. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. We are joining to this forum from different continental, and I would like to greet all of you on behalf of MedReg President Petrit Ahmeti, unfortunately who couldn't make it today. And the questions has been already somehow partially answered by Andrea and by David as well. But I have been in the energy sector since more than almost 30 years, I would say that. And if you look at to the back, I have seen that every almost 10 years, we have been facing with a kind of force majeure, with a kind of different developments, with a kind of technological developments. And these change the energy, the functioning of the energy markets significantly and dramatically. If you go back again 2000s, we have seen the economic crisis, which significantly changed the developments in the energy markets. If you come up almost 10 years later, we have faced with this Fukushima nuclear disaster, and we have seen the development of the shale gas in America. These two developments, even not two developments, these two circumstances have also changed the developments in the energy markets. Now again, almost 10 years later, we have faced with this COVID pandemic. No one was expecting this one and how it's going to change the development in the energy markets. Of course, in general, we are doing our projection based on usual business as usual scenarios. But of course, this has shown us that we have to also make some other projections based on different, let's say, the force majeures and disasters as well. When the World Health Energy Organization declared this COVID viruses as a kind of pandemic for all worlds, of course, we have contacted immediately to our regulators in order to see how they are coping with the pandemic and which kind of measures they have already taken and they are planning to take in the future. Based on these developments, we have sent a questionnaire to our regulators, and majority of them have replied to the questionnaire in order to assess the impact and the consequences of a pandemic in the energy on the energy markets. And if I would summarize the result of this survey or the short note on the developments in the energy markets in the Mediterranean region, I would say that we can divide into three categories. The first one is the economic measures. So under these measures, not only the regulators, but also the policymakers develop some additional funds and also subsidies in order to cope with the impact of the pandemics. And secondly, we see that we have some administrative measures. So what does it mean, administrative measures? Mainly the measures that have been taken by the regulators, such as exemptions and or suspension of licenses, certification, comply with the quality of services obligation, extension of deadlines, frozen of the tariffs, and similar measures that the regulators have already made it for the market players. And in the third, let's say, the measure, we see the protection of the end users. As already David highlighted, that the most important things under this pandemic situation is to ensure a continuous and affordable energy supply to all consumers. And in that respect, I mean, the regulators have also, I'm very pleased to inform you that taken some measures to ensure this continuous energy supply to end users, particularly to the vulnerable consumers, because they are the most the vulnerable one who has been affected from the impact of the pandemics. And due to the non-payment, for example, and due to the other reasons, no one, somehow regulators oblige all the market players not to cut off the energy supply to anyone. Of course, we will see how the pandemic will develop in the future. And as we have already declared, as we have already stated, that everyone was expecting that this pandemic will go maybe some couple of months, but now we have finished the first year. Now we are in the center of the second years. I hope it will finish in the end of this year, and then we will come back to our normal lives. And here we have to think how we are interlinked with each other into 3 months period all over the world affected from the pandemic. So it means another questions for all of us to clearly think once more that how we are interlinked with each other and how we should cooperate and collaborate with each other in the future, particularly towards the climate change and towards creating a functioning energy market for all of us. I will just stop here, Kathleen, for the second questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hassan. And I know we're all hoping and praying that COVID-19 will be over soon and we can return to some semblance of normalcy. Edwin, this is the 200th Independence Celebration Year of Peru. What has been the Peru experience with COVID-19 and its impact on advancing universal energy access?
Thank you very much, Kathleen. I would like to greet as a representative of Austin Ergmin. I would like to thank all or greet our American friends, our European friends. We have a very important uh, meeting today. And so I would like to mm, talk about two areas. First of all is the impact of COVID, and second is the advance on universal energy access. I think the first situation has already been described. We've had a critical impact here in Peru. COVID-19 has had a huge impact on our economy. After 20 years of continuous growth, um, stepped back. It was one of the countries that had most of the setbacks in Latin America. We have started to overcome this. We will overcome the pandemic, I hope, and we will move forward. I think that we will um, finally get over this. The pandemic has impacted Peru in a very big way, as I said before. In general terms, 30% of the energy activity was limited, was restricted. The demand dropped. So basically, we have been affected by this, and the activity of the regulators has been affected as well. We have started applying new methodologies. You have seen the video that we have presented just a few minutes ago. So I think this has been a learning opportunity, uh, a demonstration of resilience on the part of regulators and the Peruvian population as well. We have some support programs for the natural gas users and electricity users, the more vulnerable users. Activity has dropped in 30%, and this brought many problems during lockdown. Electricity became more important. There was a higher consumption. With regards to universal access to energy, um, there are two important areas here. Access to electricity and access to clean energy. In the planet, there are 800 million people that do not have access to electricity. And in the Peruvian case, we have made a lot of progress in the last decade. We still have a 4%, which is the most difficult segment of the population. And I think the idea is to get close to provide this segment with a solution, with a complete and integrated solution with renewable energy. We've had very interesting experiences in the coverage of the vulnerable population sector, but we still have to work with this 4%. At the beginning of the reform in the 90s, we had 55% of coverage. Now we have a 90%, 96% coverage. And so this has been slowed down a little bit during the pandemic. However, we are continuing making our efforts. In clean energy use, well, here in Peru, 75% of the population has access to efficient sources of energy. So we have a 25% challenge in this area that where we have to establish as one of the objectives of sustainable development to provide sources that are economic and low emission sources that our rural population requires. And finally, I would like to say that according to the Global Economic Forum evaluations, Peru is in the position 15 out of 315 economies regarding energy policies. So this means that we are taking measures. We are considering this a very important pillar where we require important contributions by professionals, which is what we are doing right now in this forum. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Edwin. We will continue with Elijah.
O sea, el sentido de audio y video por cable. No, lo que pasa es que me imagino que cuando me he quedado de la reunión.
Thank you, Edwin. Elijah, what opportunities and challenges has COVID posed with regards to universal energy access in the RERA member states? Elijah?
Thank you very much, Moderator Catherine, and let me also convey apologies on behalf of our RERA chairperson who could not join us due to other pressing commitments, and I also join others in recognizing our fellow panelists and indeed those that are participating in this very important event. I think let me state two things just on the outset that will inform the interventions that I'll be making during this panel discussion. First and foremost, I would like to state that as a Southern African region, in short, we call it SADC. This is a Southern Africa Development Community. We have a revised regional energy access and strategy document. This was developed in November 2019. So this is a very, very important document that addresses energy access in the region. The second important regional initiative that I would also like to highlight upfront is that we've done an initial assessment of the impact of COVID with the support of the World Bank. So there is an assessment note that has been done. Both these two documents, I would be happy to share with those that may be interested. So as you can tell from the documents done, there's a lot that I can share, but given the time limitations, I think I will indeed try to just give a sense of those major highlights. So let me start first by addressing the challenges, and then I can talk to the opportunities later on. Now, in our region, a lot of our countries are developing countries, and as such, resources are very limited. And what has happened with this pandemic, one of the challenges is that the focus has shifted, largely onto the health and social welfare, in the short term, and that's what basically is happening. So given this shift, in terms of the focus, the investments or resources that were initially meant for electricity access and clean cooking have had to be diverted to health and social welfare initiatives. So I think that's basically one of the challenges that one would like to highlight insofar as the COVID impact is concerned. The second impact that I would like to highlight is that, the economic shock that other panelists have talked about have basically led to many of the vulnerables, or let me say the indigents or the low-income households in our region, to be basically lose the means, with which to be able to afford the energy services. So most of them are, or a good number of them are unable to actually afford the cost of electricity. So this has actually meant that in as much as the rural folks, especially rural communities, are provided with access to electricity, they have, or they do not have the ability to maximize the benefit of electricity, that can be unlocked. And again, like I said, it's the issues of affordability that have basically impacted them very negatively. The third point that I just would like to highlight in terms of the challenges is that most of our supply chains, a lot of what is needed in terms of equipment and even expert services, most of them do not tend to be within our countries, and these tend to be outsourced, and in most cases externally. or if it is equipment that one would like to talk about for the electrification projects, it's imported. There have been extensive supply chain disruptions. And also coupled with the fact that because of the lockdowns and the travel restrictions, a lot of projects have had significant delays. And as a result of that, naturally energy access is negatively impacted. So I think those are just by way of the three key challenges that I would like to highlight, of course, from a third world perspective. But of course, there are opportunities that we also see. And I think one of the opportunities arising from the COVID impact is that it gives us an opportunity to basically look at increasing energy access for the sake of reaching out to the healthcare facilities, the schools, and the critical government operations. It emphasizes or presents an opportunity for the need for us to fast track electricity access, particularly using renewable energy, solar with battery storage systems, that can quickly and help quite a lot in terms of the health centers. Because the COVID vaccines, some of them require a cold chain, and as such, electricity access becomes very, very, very critical. So I think that's one opportunity for us to be able to increase access to electricity, to health facilities. The second aspect, I think, is what was also covered by our host member regulator, Ozingamin, in the video. We have the opportunity to embrace technology. Reason being that with all these restrictions that are happening, we can use technology to basically unify and enable the momentum needed to reach universal access, within our region. Now, what we need to do is to be able to have information readily available, so much so that our own utilities, our private investors, and any other person who would also like to basically invest in increasing energy access can have the information needed to be able to do so. Now, specifically, what sort of technology am I talking about? Here we are saying, let's try and use the GIS spatial mapping. And as such, for this tool, if it were developed and if it is developed in our region, we think it can also be a tool that can be used to basically promote universal access by having each country's energy resources kind of made readily available or known, the population density of the countries, the customer willingness to pay, and of course the ability, the existing infrastructure that is within the region, and of course some of the future grid plans that may be on the cards, the existing tariffs, so that those that would like to invest can make decisions, and also the cost for the mini grids and off-grid systems, and indeed the fuel cost. So I think these are just, in a nutshell, two opportunities that we see that COVID-19 actually brings to the fore. Moderator, I submit for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elijah, for that comprehensive response. We'll move right along to round two of the questions. And the overall question is, climate change is impacting many countries. How is climate change impacting universal energy access? And Andre, your question specifically is, what are the transformations that the energy sector influenced by climate change has undergone, and what are the impacts on universal access to energy?
Thank you for the question, Caitlin. Bom, primeiro, digo que el sector eléctrico mundial
I have to say that the worldwide energy sector goes through an accelerated process of transformation that has totally disruptive nature and in many aspects. The current 21st century promises to enter into a new energy time or era, and some social trends and technological trends support these transformations. The first one has to do, or is the change of behavior of customers. At present, we have a consumer that wants to exert a more active role on their decision making for consumption, having the opportunity to generate their own energy through the generation or through distributed generation. Another trend is the growing environmental awareness of consumers and of governments. The Paris Accord defined for the first time at the worldwide level challenges for the reduction of greenhouse gas effects. The need to decarbonize or the need for decarbonization is not only an opinion, it's a fact. Finally, another important trend is the introduction of new technologies like the distributed generation, electrical vehicles, and the
Sistemas de
popularization of
almacenamento.
storage systems.
Temos uma nova
We
maneira
have a new way of behaving. These are the three dimensions, the 3D, that form the pillars of this new electrical sector and that guide the policymakers, digitalization, the decarbonization, and decentralization. Thanks to the digitalization, the world is experiencing the fourth industrial revolution. Digitalization is helping to improve the security and the provision, the accessibility, and the sustainability of the energy systems throughout the world. Within this process, the volume of information and data available to consumers is higher with the arrival of smart measurers, smart sensors, and with the Internet of Things. From the side of the generation of energy, the digitalization also allows the operability of the system in a more automated manner, looking for higher security and efficiency in the operation of the system. The term decarbonization invites to the declination or the reduction of sources energies that produce greenhouse gas effects, thanks to the export of new sources of clean energy. The transition that is occurring worldwide goes towards the direction of decarbonization. The last dimension, which is the decentralization, indicates the trend to generate or the generation close to the centers of load through interconnected systems. From the consumer, decentralization allows that consumers will assume a more active role in the electrical sector. The concept is closely related to decarbonization and to digitalization, as the majority of the units for generation are or come from renewable sources that have to be coordinated in order to reach security and efficiency. In isolated areas, in remote areas, and areas of low consumption, where the more of the gap that needs to be covered in Latin America, we are talking about 10 million people. The mini grids and the domestic systems are being transformed in a faster and more efficient manner to provide electrical services. And this is the last form to provide access to the whole region within the agreed upon term. From there, the importance of decentralization for universal access to energy. These would be my comments to answer the question, Kathleen.
Thank you very much, Andre.
Thank you.
Muchas.
David, there was a major winter storm in Texas earlier this year that caused energy outages for days and even longer in some cases. What lessons have been learned and what climate change policies have been formulated and adopted to ensure universal energy access?
Thank you for the question, Kathleen. I think that what we are seeing and what we are learning is that the disruptions attributable to climate change are already here. They're no longer something off in the future. In Texas, this year there were 3 winter storms. They left about 5 million people without power for as long as 5 days when temperatures were as low as -2 Fahrenheit. I think that's -18 Celsius. That was the lowest temperature in 72 years. And Texas wasn't able to cope with the storm. Their infrastructure was not properly weatherized to deal with these kinds of cold temperatures. And in addition, Texas has always been very protective of its independence, so it did not interconnect with the other grids around it, so it couldn't count on its neighbors for imports of power. But it's interesting that these severe temperatures, scientists are already linking those with climate change because the jet stream at the polar regions is weakening, and therefore the weather that used to be contained in the poles now moves farther south. And so we were seeing severe winter weather in places like Texas and Mexico. In my area, in the Pacific Northwest, we were seeing a different problem. We were seeing heat waves that we have never seen before. In my region of the country, we have temperatures average around 18 to 21 degrees, and yet we were seeing temperatures of 44 degrees last week. And this is unprecedented. We have never seen this before. And so we're a region that relies on hydropower. And that means that we need to rely on a snowpack in the mountains that melts in a gradual way to put water into the rivers behind the dams. And so what we're seeing now is the snowpack is melting too soon, and we don't have the supply of hydropower late in the season that we normally do. We are also seeing wildfires, and the wildfires in our areas, again, they are unprecedented, and they are actually disrupting transmission lines. Last week, California was unable to import more than 5,000 megawatts of power from the Pacific Northwest because the transmission lines had been damaged in storms and the workers could not reach them to repair them. So we're seeing a lot of disruption. We have got to do 2 things. In the longer term, we have got to reduce our reliance on fossil fuels, and we need to promote conservation and renewable energy, because ultimately we need to reduce carbon emissions, and that's the way to do it. In the short term, we have to make sure that our infrastructure is sufficient to deal with the new normal, the weather changes that we have. If we can't count on snowpack in the mountains for hydropower, we need to find new ways to generate power. And if we don't have proper weatherization to protect against cold weather, then we're going to see these kinds of disruptions too. So there are long-term and short-term issues that we need to deal with. But climate change is here. And I think, again, everything that I heard Andre say, I fully agree. We need to embrace the Paris Accords. We need to make sure that we are starting to implement measures around the world to deal with this crisis. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. You surely have given us quite a range of different activities that have impacted you in the USA. Hassan, what has been the experience of your members with climate change? How have they been coping?
Thank you, Kathleen. Thank you, David. Thank you, Andrea. You have already touched upon on this very important issue. And as David already indicated, climate change is a real circumstances and is at the door. I am 53 years old. And since last 45 years, I have been witnessing and I have been observing how the climate has been changing. And when I was a child, I have been living in the same region almost in the last 50 years. And I remember when I was a child, we had 1.5 meters snow in Ankara, near to Ankara. Today, unfortunately, we have almost no snow in the region. And in the past, we had the 4 seasons for regular season: winter, summer, fall, and spring. But nowadays, unfortunately, it decreased to only 2 seasons, winter and summer. Climate change is at the door, as I said, as David said, as Andre said. So therefore, a joint and common endeavors and performance is needed from all over the world. We are all living in one world, and we are living in one ship, and we have no other place to go. That's why, as it has already been indicated and stated, that we have to implement as soon as possible the Paris Agreement, as soon as possible. And we have to act on time, otherwise it could be very late for all of us too. I am very pleased to inform you that today, European Commission has approved to decrease greenhouse gas emissions by 55% by 2030. As you may recall, that European Commission is leading towards the decarbonization and combating with the climate change in the world. And you may remember 2020 strategy of the European Commission, decreasing greenhouse gas emission by 20%, improving the energy efficiency by 20%, and increasing the share of renewable energy by 20% by 2020. And again, I'm so glad that European Commission and European Union has reached to these very important targets. Now they are working on 2030 targets. And there has been a lot of discussions in the past 2-3 years on to reach a kind of ultimate goal by 2050 to decarbonize the energy market in the European Union at least. Towards these endeavors, today they have approved 55% to decrease greenhouse gas emissions. To me, it's a very significant target and it's a very important objective. So as you know that half of our almost members are from the European Union, are the members of the European Commission. And we have also Balkan countries, including Turkey. And we are also covering the South African and the East Mediterranean countries as well. So if you look at the scenarios or the projections, it is clearly stated that the Mediterranean region would be one of the worst regions affected from the climate change. That's why we would like to first ensure an interconnected Mediterranean energy market in our region and creating a functioning energy market. And of course, in order to do this one, we have already identified several activities, several deliverables in order to combat with the climate change. For example, we are developing a lot of activities in promoting the renewable energy in our region. We are also developing some other activities, also improving the energy efficiency. For example, one of our activities, one of our deliverables under 2021 is to assess the situation in the energy efficiency. I believe that at least my experience showed me that this energy efficiency issue is somehow neglected in many regions. And I believe that it's a very crucial and important subject as well, combating with the climate change. It should be taken into account and it should be taken in our focus if we really effectively improve our energy efficiency. And of course, as I said, that many European Union has a long-term strategy, and of course, America has some strategies as well. But looking at the future projections, China, India, they have also some targets as well to improve or to promote the renewable energy, at least to have some targets towards the towards the greenhouse gas emission by 2050 and 2060s. In the end, as MEDREC, we are working towards this direction, and we are majority of our members are fully aware of the realities. In that respect, we are developing the strategies, the roadmaps, and we are working closely with our members for a kind of joint efforts towards combating with the climate change. And in the end, I would say one thing, that a common and joint endeavors is needed to fight with this climate change. Thank you, Kathleen.
Thank you very much, Hassan. We'll move right along to Edwin. What regulations will OCENIC adopt and implement in the future to mitigate negative climate change impacts?
Bien, gracias, Kathleen.
Thank you, Kathleen. In general, I would like to, first of all, to refer to what is OCENIC. OCENIC is the regulatory entity that guides the ones that guides the political policies of the sector is the Ministry of Energy and Mines. I have to say this because they create the policies. But OCENIC has an active role. I was listening to some opinions of the previous speakers, and what is important to mention, I was recalling an investigation from Spain that said that Latin America is an exporter of raw materials, but importing models, whether they work or not. We have to be very careful. It is good to take foreign experiences, but I believe that there is a fundamental element. Latin America is the most renewable solution or region of the planet. It has its own solutions. I believe that in this global context, the contributions that the three grand blocks do, China, the United States, or Europe, will be fundamental, essential in the decision making that we will do and in the projects that we will adopt. In that, I would like to set an important position in the sense that, yes, in Latin America, we do require global solutions that are efficient, but we want to say we need efficient solutions, but competitive solutions as well, with that characteristic that allows us to advance in the development of our region. In the Peruvian case specifically, in the latest years, there have been important advances. In the last decade, we have contributed with 1,300 megawatts for renewable energies and equivalent with conventional renewable, especially hydropower, which is very predominant in our country. This has been important. Both solutions with more than 2,500 megawatts have been provided by private sector solutions, by contributions of operators from the private sector. The government also contributed, but it was basically contributed by the conditions that existed in Peru to attract the foreign investments in the last decade. Additionally, regarding the universal access, there has been an important auction in the last decade, which was the auction of the 210,000 photovoltaic off-grid solar panels. This has been very important. It has been the most important auction in the world, and it was also a solution where the private sector contributed, which I believe is fundamental. This has allowed to provide energy and advance almost 3% in the electrical coverage. We also had an important program to provide natural gas to more than 1 million inhabitants, which have brought different needs or requirements of subsidies of natural gas, especially for the development of the grid. And in the future, what we propose in general terms is what I would like to call sustainable and efficient solutions for the access to energy that has to do, that needs to have that condition, has to be efficient and competitive. From OCENIC, we have identified as a regulatory body 3 measures. The first one is related to the schedule tariffs that will encourage electrification. So we require to electrify our primary grid. We need to convert it to electrical use and search for renewable as well as they are competitive. Secondly, the clean cooking. This has been analyzed in depth, and in general, we are assessing induction clean kitchens in rural areas. We not only want to cover the need, but we also want to insert a source that is equivalent, that will provide with competitiveness and efficient substitution. And also the facilities with the tariffs, with the fees, um, for to incentivize electrical vehicles in appropriate schedules, and with solutions that will allow to have reduced costs for the adoption to these technologies. I would summarize in these three elements our vision as a regulatory body.
Thank you very much, Edwin. Last but not least in this round, we have Elijah. Elijah, what resources do you need to assist with climate change impacts on ensuring that universal energy access policies are implemented?
Thank you very much, Kathy. Let me first and foremost characterize the region. The Southern African region is dominated by fossil fuels, in particular coal, and South Africa in that regard is one of the largest coal-dominated energy systems. But the paradox of the matter is that we have abundant renewable energy resources that can actually meet our needs manifolds. And also, in addition to renewable energy, the energy efficiency potential is also quite huge. And assessments have been done that we can actually conserve so many units of electricity. So that's the situation we are in. Fossil fuel dominated, abundant resources, but from the supply perspective, we still have precarious situations in most of our countries, and it's not unusual for them to be load shedding and so forth. So I think given that sort of the region, and maybe when one looks at the issues around what could be done to try and address some of the climate change issues, I think as a region, given the character that I've portrayed, we have an opportunity to be able to relook at the fossil fuel subsidies that are actually being perpetuated in one way or the other. And there are two main reasons why we would need to look at fossil fuel subsidies. First and foremost, one can argue that with the increased public health expenditure that most of our countries are currently having, it is highly unlikely that they will be able to afford those subsidies. So that's the first reason. The second reason is that the subsidies that are saved on fossil fuels can also be channeled to basically increasing energy access. And given the COVID pandemic situation, as I said in my area interventions, the rural health facilities need to have access to electricity. So those fuel subsidies saved can actually be used for increasing access. The other important point that I'd like to make also in terms of the financial resources is that if we are to basically have universal access by 2030, according to the International Energy Agency, we need to increase funding to a tune of 400%, basically looking at the current levels of investments. And half of that would have actually would have to go to investments in off-grid systems. So I think as countries, not just thinking the region, but globally, we need to make sure that we create environments that would enable other participants, not just public, but also the private sector to be able to participate in particularly our region trying to change the current paradigm of a fossil fuel dominated energy supply system. So we need policies, we need legal reforms, we need a regulatory environment that would actually promote the utilization of renewable energy and also energy efficiency, so that we, with these resources, that is in terms of the energy resources and the financial resources available, we can actually be able to try and assist in addressing some of the climate imperatives that we need to address, but in so doing, then also increase energy access. So I think, moderator, in a nutshell, that would be my submission on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elijah. We're moving right along to round 3. The overarching question is, what role are renewable energy, diversity and inclusion initiatives, i.e. gender, race, age, etc., playing in achieving affordable, sustainable energy access in keeping with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal number 7. Now, gentlemen, we are pushed for time, so I am going to limit each one of you with only 2 minutes for this question in this round. So please make your response as concise as possible, because we still need to wrap up, and we are mindful that there is a second panel discussion after ours. So, Andre, how receptive have your ARIA members been to increasing energy generation from renewable sources?
Thank you for the question, Caitlin. Bom, digo que la energia renovável...
Renewable energies are a reality. And in Brazil and in several countries of Latin America and member countries of ARIA, solar energy, wind energy sources are exponentially growing in our electrical matrices. If the global matrix depends on fossil fuels, in Latin America is in a privileged situation. Here in Brazil, the participation of renewable sources of energy is 34%, whereas the world average is 25%. The countries members of the OECD, only 25% of them have renewable energies. This information shows that our electrical matrix is one of the cleanest in the world, and this also happens with the electrical matrices of the most of the ARIA countries. These figures mirror our large hydroelectrical park that represents more than 60% of the electricity produced in the country. And we have the participation of a larger participation of hydroelectrical plants with the introduction of new sources of renewable energy. The participation of the hydroelectrical plants is bigger. The wind energy sources have increased a lot, and they have generated wealth for the population, cleaner energy for the country. Wind energy represents 10% of our matrix. Solar energy is also increasing at an accelerated pace, 4% here in Brazil. And whereas 15 years ago, none of these sources existed in our electrical matrix, nor wind, neither solar. And the idea is to increase we hope to increase our production in 92% by 2030. Energy transition is being produced at a global level. And the idea, our intention is to decarbonize. And so in the latest meeting of area regulators in Punta Cana, we issued the Punta Cana Declaration that stated that we, as regulators, should facilitate the evolution of the sector and eliminate barriers for the technological development and the social and environmental demands of people. We need to promote a regulation that promotes efficiency, cost reduction, quality for our consumers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andre. Moving along, David, with the USA being an oil producing country, what is the level of enthusiasm for increasing electricity generation from renewable energy sources? What incentives are there to increase, to rely more on renewable energy sources? Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Kathleen. Well, first of all, oil is not a large part of our energy generation mix in the United States. Our national mix is about 40% natural gas, 19% coal, 20% nuclear, and 20% renewables. And coal plants are shutting down just because natural gas is now cheaper. So we're seeing a dramatic increase in shutdowns of coal plants. But in my country, there's an increasing concern about climate change. And recent polling shows about 50% of Americans believe that climate change is now a critical threat. And I think the more that they see the extreme weather and the heavy rainfalls, the hurricanes, they're starting to associate that with climate change. So I think that those numbers are going to go up. President Biden has announced a goal of reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 50% by 2030. And this proposal would, among other things, create tax credits and financial grants available for more renewable energy, billions of dollars for research, and a lot of another couple of billion for making homes and buildings more energy efficient. So there is a lot going on in this space. I think that the one thing that is going to be, of course, the difficulty here is that transitions are hard. You disrupt workers. People lose their jobs in traditional industries and have to find new ones. You have stranded costs if you walk away from infrastructure that is currently working and producing electricity. And then you have the costs of consumers. And I think this is something that we have to be very cognizant and very careful about how we deal with, because it affects, you asked about gender, race, and age. Of course, when costs go up, it affects the elderly. It affects households that are being run by single women. It affects minorities to a larger degree. And so there's going to have to be a lot of coordination, but I think there's going to have to be a lot of acceptance too, that we have to move towards non-carbon emitting sources of electricity. And that's my answer. Thank you, Kathleen.
Thank you very much, David. We're going to, Hassan, your question. How are MedReg countries progressing energy access and being intentional on developing programs to make it easier for women and seniors to have affordable access?
Thank you, Kathleen. It's an important question. So of course, as MedReg, we believe that energy access should be a right of every individual. I mean, in that respect, considering that today almost 10% of the world population has no access to energy infrastructures, particularly to electricity infrastructure. So majority of these population are living in African countries mostly. So as MedReg, as we are covering Southern Africa, East Mediterranean, Balkans, and European Union, the level of developments in energy sectors is a bit different than each other. So in the end, we are trying to create a single functioning energy market in the Mediterranean region. Of course, in that respect, we strongly believe that the regulation can pave the way for access to energy infrastructures. At least I have seen from my own experience that with a good regulation, with a competitive, affordable, and transparent regulation, I believe that we can somehow promote the investment in the infrastructures. We can somehow ensure the free access by all participants to the infrastructures, and regulators can also cope with vulnerable consumers issues, and they can ensure that these groups can also access to energy infrastructures. In that respect, as MEDREC, we believe that empowering women and promoting gender equality is a crucial accelerating sustainable development, and ending all forms of discrimination against women and girls is not only a basic human right, but also a multiplier effect across across all other development areas. So in that respect, I mean, the transition towards a renewable, distributed, decarbonized energy system is creating an array of social and economic benefits. As MEDREC today, we are paying special attention to this aspect by ensuring that the gender issues are always considered when discussing regulatory matters that affect consumers and energy access. In that respect, we have already indicated in our ground contract with the European Commission, and then as I already said, that we are going to pay even more attention to this aspect in the future while organizing our activities. Thank you, Kathleen.
Thank you very much, Hassan. Edwin, a recent report entitled Tracking Sustainable Development Goal 7, the Energy Progress Report, notes that Latin America and the Caribbean have the largest level of renewable energy uses, thanks to hydropower, bioenergy, and industrial purposes and biodiesel for transportation. What plans and incentives does Osigmeng have to further promote the generation of electricity viable renewable sources?
Muchas gracias. Bueno, como
Thank you
señala
very much. Well, as Kathleen said, South and Central America are the areas of interest here. I would like to make my analysis on the primary energies. We do have a competitive advantage here, but we also have a very big challenge. The big challenge in Latin America is that we depend on oil. We have levels higher than 42%. It is only comparable to the Middle East, and we do not have the Arab production. So as a consequence, I think that the main challenge for the Peruvian case and the South American case is how to replace that oil with efficient sources, efficient and competitive sources. And this is the transition and the decarbonization that should lead us to that the use of these sources of energy. In the Peruvian case, a fundamental sector in our country is mining. So mining is our locomotive for growth in the country, and this requires efficient energy use. So in 2000 and from 2005 to 2019, mining grew by 146% in copper production, and Chile had a growth of 9%, and Chile is the main producer. So what's the difference? Why does one grow a lot and one not so much? This is explained by the cost of copper. So the idea or the question is how to grow as a country with clean energies, with clean competitive energies. And I'm not talking only about renewables. Following the North American example, there is a lot of natural gas to be used here for transportation, for mining, basically. So I think that that's the challenge that we have here in Peru, how to convert that primary fossil oil energy into other cleaner sources of energy.
Thank you very much, Edwin and Elijah. When we speak of universal energy access, more focus is placed on access to electricity services. There is about 33% of the world's population that does not have access to clean cooking fuels and technologies. What are some of the initiatives being introduced in Southern African states to improve access to clean cooking fuels and technologies?
Thank you, Catherine. During the time that we were basically revising the regional strategy, it was very evident that clean cooking did not have the attention that it deserves. And it was also evident that data on clean cooking was not readily available within the region. So I think in terms of the strategy that the region has developed, one of the things that is in the strategy is basically to encourage every country within the region to have a strategic framework for universal access to clean cooking solutions. That's basically one of the recommendations that is in the strategy that we have for the region. Now, as part of this strategy, it also entails creating or promoting awareness, on clean cooking solutions, but also more importantly is to prioritize, clean cooking, and if anything, make it at the same level as electricity services or electrification. So I think in a nutshell, that's what I would like to state as something that is being done. And part of those clean cooking solutions, I think they are very varied, but in the interest of time, one can mention efficient cook stoves and indeed many others. So I think in a nutshell, Kathy, that's what would be my submission. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Elijah. I know, this panel discussion has been so rich in discussion and we're running out of time. So we've completed round 3 and we are at round 4. And we were supposed to be able to ask, each panelist was supposed to be able to ask at least one question. But because of time constraints, we can only have one question to one of the panelists. And I'm not sure which one of you has a burning question that you would like to ask of the panelists before we close out this round and I give my closing remarks. No questions? Good.
Nice.
Pardon?
No, it's okay, no questions.
Okay, no questions.
So
right.
I do have a question, Kathleen, and it's I throw it out to all the panelists, so maybe we can do a lightning round here.
Sure.
Do you think we have the tools and the will to successfully address climate change?
Can I answer, Kathleen?
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yes, of course. David, thank you very much for these questions. Of course, we have tools and means to combat with climate change. At least again, from my life, I can give an example. 20 years ago, I was in an international conference. In that international conference, it was said that renewable energy sources is a romantic story. Forget about this one. It will not change the world. But after 20 years, we closely and then we are monitoring that it has changed and it will change the world, particularly combating towards the climate change. If we if we bring all our powers, if we commonly act on time, one of the tools is Paris agreements. And if we act on time, I strongly believe that we can change. And just in 20 years, I would like to just pay your attention how renewable energy sources significantly change the skin of energy markets in the world. And considering that the hydrogen is coming, considering that the technological developments and other issues, if it is included, I believe that we can change and it can be changed.
Thank you, Hassan. Does anybody else want to respond to that?
Yes, Kathy, I think,
Go ahead, Elijah.
yes, I would also agree that indeed we have the tools at our disposal. I think these are well known and documented, but the challenge is basically the political and policy will. I think, to me, that's where the challenge is. Thank you.
Também, Kathleen, I can talk. Acredito também que temos todos
I think that we have all the means in order to make progress for the sustainability of renewable energies. But I also think it's a matter of public policy. I think that it has to be a joint effort of governments and regulators. In this way, we could have an electrical sector that is more renewable, is highly sustainable as well. If you allow me, I would like to say that climate change is something not, it's not something that is going to happen in the future. It's already happening. So it requires immediate actions. I remember a phrase that says that my hope is on millennials because they have this sense of emergency. I think we need more millennials. I think we need more active people that would like to drive us towards these new solutions.
Thank you very much, gentlemen, for your response to that question. And that wraps up round 4. So now I'm going to give some brief closing remarks before we close the session today. We spoke about the impact of COVID-19 on universal energy access. And one of the recurring themes was the economic impact was negative on everyone throughout the world. However, despite that, policies were made, changes were made to ensure that the most vulnerable continue to have energy access despite the pandemic, and even if resources were shifted to health and safety issues, because it is a pandemic and we have to be mindful of the necessity to ensure that we successfully end this pandemic. Also spoke about climate change, and it's a reality in all of our countries and all of our regions, and how disruptive it is in terms of the differences in the weather patterns, in terms of heat waves, winter storms, lack of snow to provide water for hydro generation. And so it is critical that we address these issues because, one, they're not going anywhere. They're here to stay. 2, we need to improve our infrastructure to ensure that despite these disruptions from climate change, our infrastructure can withstand the changes and still provide energy at all times, reliable, safe energy for all at all times. And when we speak about renewable energies, we need to ensure that it is competitive, and that at the end of the day, that even with that transition from energy generation that is more in line with fossil fuel, that we do not negatively impact others in terms of the affordability and the accessibility to energy access. And of course, as I also said in the question to Elijah, we place a very strong focus on access to electricity, but part of the energy equation is also access to clean cooking fuels and technologies. And with 33% of the world not having access to that, we still need to pay attention to that. Ladies and gentlemen, this comes to the end of our panel discussion. I would like to thank each of our panelists today for their participation and their enthusiasm. I am very grateful that I had a very good panel today, and we look forward to another event soon. So this concludes panel one. We are now finished, and we will now take a 5-minute break until we start the next session. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night. And thank you to the audience for listening and participating with us today. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathleen.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathleen.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Muy bien, muchísimas gracias, Kathleen Rivière, por haber sido
Thank you,
moderadora.
Kathleen, for moderating this first block. We would like to thank our panelists as well for participating in this block on universal energy access. We have had the opportunity to accelerate access to electricity due to our own health needs during COVID-19. And we are learning, we have learned about the climate changes that are affecting energy. We try to look for sustainable and competitive solutions through the use of renewable energies. So thank you very much to all our panelists of Block 1. After the after this, well, you know that Peru is a country that has many natural resources and a huge potential for the development of the energy mining sector. So now we're going to watch a video about the energy sector in our country. It ranks second worldwide as a copper producer with 2.1 millions and is the world's second largest silver producer. It is a major producer of gold, zinc, and lead. In the last 20 years, electricity services have increased from 70% in 2001 to 96% in 2020. Greater coverage benefited rural areas. In 2001, only 28% of rural homes had electricity. By 2020, 86% of those households were connected to the grid. Natural gas provides 38% of the energy mix. The natural gas industry added $1 billion to the tax and royalty bill. Much remains to be done in developing renewable energies. Peru has vast potential to develop non-conventional energy, such as biomass, Peru, a millenary nation full of resources.
Muy bien, mis estimados participantes, vamos a tener 5 minutos de receso. En breve continuamos con nuestro segundo bloque, transición energética. Ojo, les recordamos que para este evento contamos con la interpretación simultánea en castellano e inglés. Volvemos, gracias. Bienvenidos nuevamente y a continuación vamos a iniciar el bloque 2, transición energética. En este grupo nos acompañan representantes de Canadá, Alemania, Hungría, Perú, Kenia y México. Esta sesión estará moderada por Francisco Salazar, coordinador de la Confederación Internacional de Reguladores de Energía. Además de coordinador de ICER, Francisco
Salazar is a founding partner of ENIX, a consulting firm specialized in energy regulation. From 2015 to 2017, he was president of the Mexican chapter of the World Energy Council. From 2005 to 2015, he served as president of the Energy Regulatory Commission, during which time he was an active promoter of the energy reform in Mexico. During 2011 to 2015, he chaired the Ibero-American Association of Energy Regulators. He holds a master's degree in public finance policy from the London School of Economics and is a chemical engineer from the Universidad Autónoma de San Luis de Potosí. Welcome, Francisco Salazar. Please go ahead. Muchas gracias.
Foremost, what I would like to do is to congratulate Peru because of within 2 weeks they will be celebrating the bicentennial of their independence. So congratulations, and it's really a pleasure to celebrate this with this wonderful event that we'll talk and it has been discussing the challenges of the energy sector after the pandemic. As you know, in the first part, we were talking about universal energy access. This second block is more related to the energy transition. And it's going to be a very wonderful panel. We have a very good set of speakers today. We have, in the first place, Christine Long. Christine, she is the chair of Canada's Energy and Utility Regulators, CAMPUT. She understands very well what's going on in the North American part of the continent. We also have Annegret Grobel. She's the chair of the Council of European Energy Regulators here. And so she will be taking the Western European vision. We also have Paul Sagavari. He's the vice chair of the Energy Regulators Regional Association, ERA. So he will be talking about also that part of the world. And of course, we have today our host and our dear friend, Jaime Mendoza. Jaime, thank you very much for, besides being the host, participating in this panel. Thank you very much. And as you know, he's the chair of the board of directors of Peru's Regulatory Agency for Investment in Energy and Mining, OSINAPMIN. And thank you very much, Jaime, for organizing this wonderful event. And last but not least, we have John Mutua. He's a representative of the Regional Association of Energy Regulators for Eastern and Southern Africa. So to all of you, thank you very much for deciding to participate in this very interesting block where we will be discussing, as I was telling, the energy transition. The way we will have this panel is we will have 3 rounds in which we will be discussing 3 issues that are related. In the first round, what we will be discussing is the impact of the pandemic on the availability of resources to drive the energy transitions. Once we cover that topic, we will go to the second one, which is related to the new business models that the transition implies. And we will see what's the vision of our panel members in terms of if this will have the pandemic will have an impact on this kind of business models that are resulting from the energy transition. And finally, the last issue that we will cover in this block is basically the use of digital technology. When we will ask our panel members if they think there will be a transition that will involve the digitalization of the energy services, either in the electricity or in the gas sector. So as you can see, it's going to be very interesting. So let me start with the first round, and we will start with Christine Long. Christine, do you consider that the pandemic has had a negative impact in the energy transition in North America? If so, how? If not, why?
Thank you, Francisco. And on behalf of Campus, I want to thank you for the opportunity to be able to be here today to speak with our ICER friends and to learn from everyone. Let me address that question first, Francisco, maybe setting a bit of context. So, when I think back to March of 2020, when we first became aware, I guess, of the pandemic, I was actually vacationing in the United States. That was spring break. And as I typically do, I escape the wintry north snow and head south. And I headed south with my family. And I recall coming up to a stoplight and looking at my iPhone. I was not driving, someone else was. And there was a message from our Prime Minister who was alerting Canadians traveling abroad that they needed to return home because the border was going to be closed to non-essential travel. And I looked at my sister and we were both in shock. In the many years that we had ventured far from Canada, we had never seen anything like this. And a few days later, we did return home and the border between Canada and the US closed to non-essential travel. And it is still closed to non-essential travel. The border did remain open for trade, but there's no mistaking just the impact that had on Canada with the border being closed with its largest trading partner. So, what we saw in May of 2020 was a reduction in GDP for Canada of 20%. So GDP going to a level of, 2010. So with that came an obvious reduction in energy usage as manufacturing shut down, as industries shut down, as people stayed home to the extent that they could and worked from home. I live in a province where there's 17 million people, and I can tell you for the last 17 months, many children have not been in school. They did not go back, and we're hoping that they'll go back in September. So, these are huge impacts that we saw. So I must admit, I was expecting that there would be a huge issue with respect to transition, but we haven't seen that. What we have seen is utilities continue to come forward with projects that they want to put forward to help with energy transition. We see gas companies coming forward with multi-year plans to reduce gas usage. There have been some renewable projects, I will say, that have construction has slowed, obviously, because of initial health concerns with having workers out in the field constructing, but that is back up and running, and those projects seem to be on target. But perhaps I could highlight two issues that I think we've seen that are propelling transition forward. And one, I think, is a renewed interest in planning. So I think as people look at how we could have planned better for a pandemic, people are also looking at how we can plan better for the energy transition. And so I'm seeing that among regulators and system operators that are getting together, that are talking about long-term energy plans. The second thing I'm also seeing is as we talk about transition, people are also looking at energy regulators to be ready to transition, they themselves, to be able to look at new projects, to look at what the new economy looks like and be ready to regulate. And maybe I'll just round it out, Francisco, by just highlighting three other things that have happened in the span of the pandemic period, the last 17 months, that I think are critical to the energy transition. On day one, when President Biden took over, day one, he canceled a permit for the Keystone XL pipeline, which would have been a 1,200-mile pipeline that would have taken product from Western Canada down to the US and into the Gulf states. And he did that. It was widely expected that that would happen, but that was very symbolic, I think, of his, his emphasis on decarbonization and climate change. The second issue is, and Dave Danner spoke to this a bit when he talked about extreme weather events in the Northwest. Canada is in the Northern Hemisphere. We're used to a lot of snow, we're used to a lot of ice, and the beginning of July, we saw temperatures that were, 49.5 degrees Celsius on our west coast, where the normal temperature is 21 degrees. So what we saw with that heat dome and that extreme weather was, I think, a call to action. Hundreds of people lost their lives. They were unprepared. And then the next day, wildfires devastated towns in Western British Columbia. So I think that is a call to action. And then finally, we are heading into a federal election, most likely in September, now that the pandemic seems to be easing. One of the issues in that election will be climate change. It has been very controversial, a carbon price, and that issue actually went to the Supreme Court of Canada, and the Supreme Court determined that the federal government could put a charge on carbon. So I think those three things all coming together to me show that I think the transition is going to happen, and it has not been impeded by the pandemic. So perhaps I'll turn it back to you, Francisco.
Thank you very much, Christine. We'll have time to discuss these insights further in detail after the 3 rounds. So now let me go with Annegret. Annegret, what about Europe? We've heard Christine talking about Canada, the US, but what about that part of the world? Has the pandemic helped to push more ambitious decarbonization policies, or do you see the opposite? What's your view on this?
Okay, thank you, Francesco, and thank you all for inviting me. And of course, first of all, congratulations to Peru for 200 years of independence. Regarding the question, I think definitely there was a positive impact from the pandemic on climate targets. Let me try to explain this, because of course in the first moment this sounds a little bit contradictory, that there's something good in a pandemic, and I don't want to be misunderstood, of course. What I want to say with this is probably you know that in December 2019, so more or less just shortly before the pandemic started, the European Commission published its so-called Green Deal, announcing a series of measures, of initiatives, of legislative acts to fight climate change and to become climate neutral by 2050. So that was the green transition, or the Green Deal. And the Commission indeed then delivered, and now the interesting part happened in 2020, when the heads of state of the EU decided in the middle of the year that there should be a huge resilience and recovery funding from the EU to help all member states to overcome the disadvantages of, into economic terms, of course, from the pandemic. And now the two things went together, because the proposal was then made that getting these funds should be linked to submitting plans that include at least 37% for projects that move the Green Deal. Yeah. And 20%, by the way, for projects on the digitalization side, which is equally important. And these are the twin transitions, as they are called. And so that meant that, in fact, environmental policy, climate policy targets were not seen as something opposed to economic recovery, but rather the opposite, that the economic recovery should push the energy transition. And I think that is indeed a great idea that brings forward, that pushes forward the energy transition targets and the energy transition as such. And I think there is some similarity in the infrastructure project that President Biden recently announced, also making available a number of billions of dollars in this case for projects that help the infrastructure, but also have a climate target. So the idea is the same, that unlike in the past, where very often climate policy, climate targets, environmental policy was seen as contradicting economic growth, now it is the opposite, that economic growth should be green growth. Yeah. And the last, what I want to say in this context is that to ensure that there is an energy system integration, which is at the core of the energy transition for the economy as a whole, you need to adapt the energy regulation. And for the energy regulation, we as energy regulators have our part to play, and also adapt our regulation to reach the objectives not only of energy, making energy accessible for all, etc., which is of course in itself important, and ensuring that networks are operated efficiently, etc., but that we also manage the restructuring of and the transformation of the energy system, energy and system transition with supporting regulatory tools, and that requires an approach that widens the energy regulation in the traditional sense, so to speak. So regulators have a lot of new tasks there. And for example, the CR recently published the new strategy for 2022 to 2025, saying that we want to empower the consumers for the energy transition. So placing the consumer in the core of these regulatory tasks and regulatory approach that supports and promotes the energy transition. And that's what where I see our role as energy regulators, but where more generally speaking, I want to say that and that was pushed in a way and speeded up in a way that this is now in the forefront by the pandemic. So that, in that sense, I would say yes to your question, and also clearly say linking it with the different aspects that I mentioned and that I outlined briefly, and of course happy to go into further detail. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Annegret. And now let's go to Paul. Paul, do you think the economic slowdown has affected the pace of energy transition in your region? Do you see any relationship between the effects of the pandemic and the energy transition in that area, in that part of the world?
Thank you, and hello, Francisco, and hello, everybody. I hope you can hear me well. So first of all, let me also congratulate on the 200th birthday of independent Peru, and I represent ERA, which is a Budapest-based international forum of regulators. Originally from focusing on Central and Eastern Europe, but now we have 48 members from Americas to Africas to Asia. So now it has a global reach, and it means also we have diverse level of maturity of regulators and diverse challenges from liberalizing some level of the electricity sector to how to best regulate new LNG terminals, to introduce new renewable energy schemes. So this is to change best practices this on this forum. To answer your question, I think that 2020 was very an interesting year, and it marked two important phenomena. So first, it is the globalization of the energy transition in line of the Paris goals. So first EU, then China, and at the end of the year for US, and it's becoming more and more global. But this is, I think, really the year of the change in the policy and political mindset. And the second, of course, is the pandemic, and the timing of the pandemic was very interesting, because just the energy transition story started to grow, and then came the pandemic. And personally, I believe that the response of the governments will be that let's save first our economy, and then as the second step, let's save the planet. But that not happen did not happen everywhere, and governments started to spend, and the big part of this government money went to greening of the energy sectors, and also to digitalization. This was more true for Europe, but of course in other parts of the world as well. So in that context, I think the pandemic, of course, was negative as discussed, but it hit harder the oil and gas sector. And if we compare that to the renewable sector, of course, there were delays due to technical problems, to problems of traveling. But the long-term trend is clear, that the investments are there, and supported by the government spendings and the policies throughout this difficult period. As for the current assets, the market, of course, got a shock during the pandemic. So the prices went down, both in gas and electricity markets. But it was also clear that the pandemic came somehow handy to the renewable sector, and the renewable production pushed out the higher marginal cost production type, so the coal and gas. But now it was this problem seemed to be short-lived, because the markets are back on their feet, and looking forward. And the third point, which I would like to mention here, and was interesting to see the surge of the carbon markets in those parts of the world where it is applicable. In Europe, for example, within a bit more than a year, from 3 to 5 euro per ton, it became more than 50. So it's more than 10 times higher. So it changes in the mindset of the regulators, and also in the investors, that what is in the money and what is out of the money, and how to regulate and how to look at the market. And the new chapter and the current step of the carbon story is that in Europe, it is a new proposal of the European Commission to have a carbon border adjustment on the borders, in order to levelize the carbon intensive imports within to EU from external trading partners. I believe that also on policy and trade level, it will be a heavy debate, and it will be discussed. But I think it will also pose challenges to ourselves, to the regulators, how to deal with that problem. Thank you very much for and give back the floor to Francisco.
Thank you very much, Paul. Now let's go with Jaime. Jaime, you know, LATAM has been one of the regions where the pandemic has hit harder in terms of human lives and economic growth. Do you think that this situation has put the energy transition process in Peru on hold?
Muchas gracias, Francisco, por la pregunta.
Thank you very much, Francisco, for your question. Well, it is important to point out that in spite of the health emergency, our country has already been working on energy transition initiatives. Peru has a matrix that is relatively clean. We are not alien to electrical generation with renewable energies. Around 50% of our energy is produced by hydropower. However, the percentage of renewables, non-conventional renewables, is 5%, and that is the biggest challenge that we have in our country. I should also point out that Peru was one of the main countries in driving the non-conventional renewable energy auctions in the region, and in 2008, we created a special regulatory framework. The regulators have had an essential role in 4 rounds of auctions that were carried out between 2009 and 15. We are still committed with driving the development of this kind of energies. And from our own institution, we have submitted different proposals with the objective of using the renewable energetic resources that we have, and thus increase the participation of these in the energy matrix. If you allow me, these initiatives are focused basically on the following aspects. First, allowing plants, wind, solar plants, to compete in biddings for electricity provision with the purpose of promoting competition in generation, which would lead to significant reduction in prices for electricity users. Likewise, establishing a more flexibility in the bidding process for the provision of electricity. These bidding processes should be done in a differentiated way in the short, mid, and long term. This mechanism would help us provide the right signals for the new generation projects. And finally, we are contemplating the purchase of energy by time blocks, as it has been done in other countries like Chile. Allowing the generators to offer blocks where they have more availability of energy. And finally, we are aware that our country requires to modernize its energy provisions. We have to be more competitive, and this has to translate in benefits for the citizenry, especially better quality and lower prices. Thank you, Francisco.
Thank you very much, Jaime. And now let's go with John. John, you know that different to LATAM, Africa was not hit very hard by the pandemic, at least in terms of human lives. Of course, it's a different history in terms of economic performance. But do you think it has had an impact in terms of energy policies in the region? I mean, the pandemic, do you think it has hit on that aspect?
Thank you very much, Francisco. And again, just like everybody else, just to congratulate Peru for the 200 years and also the good milestones they have made in increasing access to electricity. I enjoyed watching the video that was shown a few minutes ago. Yes, definitely yes, Francisco, energy demand in Africa, and especially within our RIRESA countries, where we are, we saw demand declining by 15% in the first 3 months when the pandemic happened. And of course, the governments within the region, I'm talking about Egypt, Kenya, Ethiopia, Countries like Zambia, Zimbabwe, the members of the COMESA region basically, are to put in various measures in order to mitigate the impact of COVID. And it is true, because what has happened is that the first thing the countries did, because I'm just talking across, because we are membership of many nations within the COMESA and within the regulators that we represent. What we saw is that countries were implementing stimulus packages in order to cushion the energy sector from the revenue losses, because utilities were not able to meet their revenue targets. So because of that, stimulus packages has to be introduced. But again, what you find is that Africa does not have a lot of resources. So we had to partner with institutions like the World Bank, even the African Development Bank came in, the EU also came in to support in that aspect. The other aspect that has been impacted, again, just like the case of Canada, has to do with planning. We do have almost all countries plan for energy. They have the least cost power development plans within the region. And what we have seen is that because of the GDP was also affected. For example, in Kenya, the GDP during the pandemic dropped to negative 0.3%. And this also happened to many other countries within the region. So countries have had to go into planning to ensure that, of course, the challenges that come up when you cannot be able to evacuate all the power because the demand has gone down, then planning had to be done. And secondly, the other issue I want to mention, that is the third one, is on the use of the internet, especially use of technology, especially with regards to operating the network, because social distancing and ensuring that people are safe. We have seen a lot of embracing of technology in running systems, the national controls, ensuring that you can be able to see the plans that are online, and that is across, again, the country. And the other issue I want to mention is on contract management. Most of the contracts that we do have in Africa, you find that because of demand risk, for example, or commercial risk, operational risk issues that are associated with the power plants, again, we have had to ensure that contract managements are improved. Issues of force majeure, like for example, in Kenya, we had the power utility actually give notices of force majeure notices. And because of that, of course, utilities, well, especially power generators who have signed contracts with these companies, did not like that. So as the regulators, we had to come in and calm the situation to ensure the power producers and also the utilities that everything was okay. And this is a communication we were doing as an association of regulators within the region, just to ensure that everything is safe. And the other issue, maybe I would want to mention before we move on to the next set of questions, is that given the poverty levels in Africa and also the way electrification is, one of the things that has happened is that we have had to fast track even access to electricity during this time. The reason is vaccines. The vaccines for COVID, whether it is extra we have been using the Zeneca here, the AstraZeneca, and what has been happening is that they require a lot of you need to store them in cool temperatures, and so because of that, we have had to fast track electricity to those areas that are in the rural areas. Maybe for now, that is what I can say for this one as Francisco. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, John. And now let's go to the second round of questions. As you know, now we will talk about the implications of a transition, of an energy transition in terms of new business models. So let me start again with you, Christine. What do you perceive as the main trends in terms of the energy transition in North America? Do you see a role for the energy regulators to push the transition in other industries different to electricity or gas? What are your insights in terms of that question?
Well, I think regulators make decisions in the context of government policy. So, we do follow that. I think maybe I can just give you some highlights of what I'm seeing in the North American market and then speak to what I think the role of the regulator is. So, in Canada, 60% of our energy is hydroelectric. We're very lucky to have those rich resources right across the country. And 15% of our energy comes through nuclear. So as our large nuclear plants become decommissioned, we are looking for other resources. So what we're seeing is small modular reactors, which our federal regulator is looking at usage in remote communities where there are no transmission lines as an opportunity to get away from diesel. So that's something that we're seeing. We're also seeing a lot on the electrification of transportation. So 33% of electricity in Canada is spent on transportation. Obviously, we have a large land mass and people travel from here to there. So we're seeing more electrification in public transit fleets, in high-speed trains, that sort of initiative. Also, I guess another trend that we're seeing is the decentralization of energy, and the other panelists spoke to that. So instead of having the large generator with transmission, far away and then coming to the end user, what we're seeing is more renewables, more smaller renewables that people and businesses are managing themselves and putting back into the grid. So those are key trends that I'm seeing. I don't think it is I don't think it's the role of the regulator to push one energy source over the other, but I do think it is the role of the energy regulator to be ready to hear the business case from utilities and other entities that come before them and make good decisions. So, not be afraid to look at it and who's bearing the risk and who's getting the reward. And I think we have to, be cognizant to the fact that there are risk propositions. What we have at My Home Regulator, we have come up with an innovation sandbox where we're inviting people to come in and talk to us about what is possible and what is not possible. And in many cases, some of these projects don't actually have to be regulated, and it can be the market that can pursue them. So, I think that's critical. I think another thing that the regulator can do is create a space for people to come and discuss issues. So, there's nothing like the tap on the on the shoulder from your regulator to say, hey, here's a problem that needs to be solved. We'd like to get everybody into the same room and talk about it. And, we've been successful with that on cybersecurity. Obviously, as we go to a more digital platform, cybersecurity is a huge interest to the regulator, but we were not of the view that we should be solving that problem, that it should be the people involved that should be coming up with the framework. So I think there's a role for the regulator to be able to get people together to come up with solutions to these very difficult problems that we're facing. And then I guess I'd probably round it out with the whole issue of regulatory certainty. What we hear from people is in order to get the investment into the projects, people need to know what the regulatory landscape is. And to the extent that we can provide any certainty in that context, it's helpful for people to get money into projects. And maybe just the last thing I'll highlight is the whole idea of pilot projects. So something that we have recently done in Ontario is we had a gas distribution company come to us with an application to blend hydrogen with gas, and a 2% blend. And so not knowing what the large scale ramifications of that would be from a cost, cost factor, they brought an application as a pilot to do in part of their distribution system, and the commission approved that pilot, and we'll be watching to see how that progresses over the next couple of years. So I think those are some ways that perhaps more subtly the regulator can help move to different types of energy sources without actually, directing what those should be. But I think those are some things that regulators can do to assist with the transition. Maybe I'll leave it at that for now.
And I fully agree with you. I mean, that can be done by the regulator. Even it seems it's subtle, I think it can make a good impact. So it's very interesting. And great. Europe is an area where the kind of decarbonization and the sector integration is discussed as part of the energy transition. Which role do you see for the energy regulators to promote the energy transition?
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you. Indeed, it was mentioned already by Paul that the Commission, for example, proposed today in their Fit for 55 package, which is the name comes from the fact that the EU decided to reduce greenhouse gases by 2030 by 55% compared to the base year of 1990. And today's proposals now try to provide the tools for this. And the point here is with regard, it's not only with regard to the energy system, to electricity and gas, because gas needs decarbonization as well. Methane is as detrimental to the climate and the environment as are CO2 emissions. Besides the border tax, the carbon tax that was proposed, which of course takes account of the fact that it doesn't make sense if Europe gets cleaner and the rest is still not doing it, or by even transferring it outside the European borders. So therefore, this is an important part to spread it. And the other thing is, and that relates to your question, is this now only limited to electricity and gas? No, one of the other instruments is in fact the CO2 emission certificate trading system, the ETS, and part of the new proposal is exactly to extend these CO2 emission trading to other sectors, namely also transport and industry, etc., in order to also decarbonize these important sectors, which are still heavily relying on CO2 intensive or methane intensive energy and energy production systems. So that's a thing that the energy transition has to include not only the energy sector, but all sectors, in particular, as I said, transport, which is accountable for a very high share of the greenhouse gases. So that's, I think, where there is a widening and a necessary widening to restructure, to decarbonize the economy as a whole, and to reach with this the climate targets and climate neutrality. Of course, this is one thing. The other things, and there I think the energy regulator has a role to play, is to use more green energy, more renewables, in other words. And I agree very much with Christine that it isn't up to the regulator to promote one particular technology or business model or energy source over the other. But of course, I think that there is a role for the regulator to ensure that markets are not distorted. And we all know that there are a lot of support schemes for renewables, which at the beginning, of course, was fine and necessary. Now there is more and more that renewables are competitive. And here the regulators come in the sense that now the support schemes are being changed towards more competitive tendering to try to not overcompensate or over support renewables, as important as they are. And that is often done by regulators, by energy regulators in particular. And I think that is an important part here where the energy regulator has a role to play. The other thing, of course, is that if you have a higher share of renewables, you also need you not only need to integrate them, as I just said, into the markets in a competitively neutral way, in an undistorted way, but you also need to integrate them in the grid. And the grid is the core of our regulatory activity. So we need to set the network tariffs in a way that the necessary investments in a grid that is capable to accommodate an increasing share of renewables are made and are made in time and economically efficient. Yeah? So that again is of course the basic principles of our regulation in that sense do not change. We have to ensure that all this, that the transition is done in a economically efficient way. And we have tools like the incentive regulation, etc. And I see there a role where NRAs then also push the energy transition by applying their regulatory instruments in the way to also achieve these. Of course, in an interaction between liberalized markets as well as regulatory design, yeah, so to speak. These two must go hand in hand. That is, let's say, the that is what we as at CR call decarbonization at least cost. Part of this also is, of course, to digitalize the system, which also serves the energy transition. I think that was mentioned. And of course, if you have digitalization, and digitalization also always creates cyber risks, and therefore cybersecurity needs to be done. And again, this is especially for the networks a part or a task of regulators as well. We are now working in Europe on network codes on cybersecurity. So that's an important part. Now let me come to the other side, and that is the consumers. What role do they play? What are their new instruments or new business models for the consumers to buy into this and to also benefit then from the energy transition and not only have to pay higher costs in the end. In the end, I think if the energy transition is managed well and regulated well, there will not be higher costs, but of course there is a transition phase. And the only thing that is necessary here is that the energy regulators take care that consumers also benefit by being more active. For example, using dynamic pricing, for example, or flexibility, other flexibility options, other flexibility products with which they can also then act and produce, being a producer, and in that sense then also benefit from lowering prices. We see very low prices on the wholesale level, but they are not always trickled down to retail markets. And thus, we think that it is important to enable the consumers to be an active part of the energy system as well. And that is an important point that we put always, that it is the energy, the consumer that should be in the center and thereby benefit and contribute to the energy transition. So that's the elements that I want to outline. And of course, as I mentioned already, for the networks within the energy system, and more broadly speaking as well, the energy system integration has to take place, because that always also then serves the energy transition. So energy system integration between electricity and gas. And here we often see different rules, and they have to be made consistent, so that, for example, hydrogen, which uses electrolyzers, can be used fully, and, for example, then supported by green hydrogen. Yeah. So again, that requires that there is a closer integration between electricity and gas, and of course also from the regulatory rules. Yeah. So these are the elements to ensure that the business models and the consumer business models, so to speak, work in the interest of the energy transition, by using the well-funded and the well used regulatory instruments that we have at our hands, in the sense that we can push it. And last sentence, just to close off, I very much agree that underlying all this is providing regulatory predictability. Yeah, so that indeed all players know what the regulator's intentions are, how the regulator is going to address the challenges that I outlined, so that they have certainty and can then play their role and make use of their business models to the best extent. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Annegret. Now let me go with Paul. At ERA, you normally discuss, gas is a very important fuel in your region. Do you think it will continue to play an important role in the medium or long run there? Do you foresee any changes on its use derived from more pressures to further decarbonize the economy? What's your opinion on that, Paul?
Yeah, thank you. I think it's maybe one of the most difficult topic. There are a lot of difficult topics of the energy transition, but this is one of the topics which could really slow it down or speed it up, because in many ERA member countries, natural gas is the #1 primary energy source today, and they play important role in key strategic sectors of the country, such as in industry, heat, or residential sector. Moreover, natural gas plays a key role today in giving flexibility to the electricity sector, which is somehow being a little bit destabilized with the decentralized and intermittent renewable sources, which are currently put into the system. And one other dilemma regarding that in ERA countries, that it has a CO2 efficiency, so it can play a role when we talk about countries who are basically relying on coal, mainly on their electricity production. So when we switch from coal to gas, then even if or even on the short term, but there is a CO2 improvement to be shown. So I mean, there is a huge debate, and there are no clear good answers regarding the future of gas. The current definition that it has a bridging fuel role. It is together with the future of nuclear. These two topics are currently open in Europe and in many parts of the world. I do believe that this discussion will come to a comforting solution. So when it comes to the biggest risk, maybe that when we try to translate what it means that gas is a bridging fuel, is that we end up investing or helping investments which are being stranded on not even on the long run, but maybe on a mid run, so a maximum one investment cycle. Of course, the vision is clear that hydrogen might be a future of the natural gas system, and it is said that maybe it's the missing puzzle of the whole energy transition. But we see that currently it is still in a research and development phase, and the greening of it should be gradual, and as there are clearly serious trade-offs when it comes to the regulator to strike a balance between sustainability and the energy cost. We have to see that in a cautious way. But what we can do is as it was mentioned by fellow panelists, the pilot projects or the sandboxes to minimize and to find out what are the technical risks of the hydrogen or other low carbon gases in putting into the energy system could be a role of the regulators. But I think both of you mentioned the regulatory predictability. I would like to add to that we are in a tricky role here, because we say that we should be dynamic and static at the same time. So I think we should discuss about this future in further what it means and how we can meet both of these challenges, because it is important and at the same time an interesting question.
Thank you very much, Paul. That's a very interesting discussion indeed. And unfortunately, we don't have time to do it in this occasion, but it's an interesting issue, very interesting. Jaime, the mining industry represents around 4 to 7% of greenhouse gas emissions globally. Considering that Osinermin also regulates this industry, what opportunities do you see there to decarbonize it? Is there anything you're pushing as the energy regulator there?
Sí, Francisco, a ver, como hemos visto en el video,
as we have seen in the video, the mining industry is the responsible of 50% of the exports of Peru. That is quite a lot. That is why it's the main activity, not only in our economy, but also in other South American economies such as Chile. Therefore, a great part of the mining emissions are related to the consumption of an energy. Approximately 27% of it. So renewable energy has become a competitive alternative for these mining units, especially for those that are located in areas with high levels of radiation or with a high speed of winds. In order to achieve the promotion of renewable energies and the establishment of clean energies, we can establish minimum gradual limits in the electricity contracts from renewable energies, for which we will need of the leadership of the Ministry of Energy and Mines of Peru. We have to take into account that the mining industry is the main buyer of liquid fuels. Therefore, the energy transition could start gradually with the substitution in the case of Peru, of diesel by natural gas or liquefied natural gas, or by hydrogen for the internal transportation of trucks, as well as for the transportation of the concentrates to the export port. We also believe that it is possible to incentivize the mining operators for the use of electrical vehicles for the carrying of materials in mining exploitation, as well as in the use of minor electrical vehicles for their operations in the mine sites. Its advantages can be noteworthy in terms of ventilation in the tunnels or in the underground tunnels where we carry out supervision in order to have security in the mining operations. Anyway, there are several fronts from where we can incentivize initiatives of decarbonization, and therefore the commitment has to be a joint effort among the public and private sectors. In these cases, the mining companies with the government. That would be my answer to your question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jaime. Now let's go with John. John, do you think the impact of energy transition is on your business model is a relevant issue in Africa? If so, where do you see opportunities to develop cleaner business than in the rest of the world?
Thank you very much, Francisco. Yes, definitely it is. You know, like clean business in Africa is one of the best things that are happening at the continent at the moment. And what you find is that especially within the renewable energy, and I'm talking about wind and solar, there are quite a number of opportunities for business to ensure that we embrace this cleaner technology into our system. So that is one area. And through energy auctions, you know, we are looking at most of the countries within the Rairesa region. They are trying to develop models for increasing uptake of renewables. And we have seen, for example, like Egypt, increasing their capacity for renewables by almost 6,000 megawatts. Yeah, which is very huge. And that is FDI that is also coming into Africa. The other area is on mini grids. You know, like this distributed generation. They do very well in Africa because of the isolated nature of the communities and the societies. Because Africans don't live all of them in the city; they live in the rural areas. But what we have seen is that there's a lot of potential for the distributed generation within the continent as well. Then the other area that is becoming important is LPG, clean cooking. And we are seeing a lot of, because a lot of Africans, a lot of households before have relied on biomass, wood fuel for cooking, even for lighting sometimes. But this is being displaced with by LPG. Not everybody is using electricity for cooking, but LPG penetration is increasing, and we have seen a lot of investments for LPG as a clean fuel for cooking. And then the other issue I want to mention is on hydrogen. Hydrogen, especially clean hydrogen or green hydrogen, is another potential for Africa. And countries within the northern part of Africa, they have already started, like in Algeria. Within the Rairesa region, within the Comesa region, I know Kenya is also trying to come in. And the potential that is in this particular area is especially with regard to power generation and also transportation, converting buses to use hydrogen and even smaller vehicles as well. Because most cities in Africa now are congested, we have to adopt, you know, like mass transport, and a lot of investments are coming in. And then the other area I can mention is on carbon markets. There's a lot of opportunities to tap into carbon market, even as we decarbonize our energy within the continent. There are opportunities to tap in because most of the world, for example, like Europe, even the Americas, there are those who may want to buy carbon credits from the investments that are being done in Africa. And I think these are new These are new investment and a new business where opportunities are there for investments to be done. And of course, lastly, we are seeing a lot of foreign direct investment coming in, especially within the renewable energy sector. So it is true, there are many opportunities to invest in the cleaner energy in Africa. And this is a business model that is going to be very vibrant as we catch up also with the rest of the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. And we are getting to the third round. Unfortunately, we're running out of time, so I will need to ask you to respond to answer very briefly in 1 minute. But fortunately, on the other hand, many the issue covered by you. So I would please ask you to briefly answer to the question. So, Christine, when we talk about digitalization, we immediately think about the electricity sector, but what about gas? Do you see any real advances there in North America, particularly at the retail level?
Maybe I'll just speak more generally about digitization. In general, I think that it's shown us, the pandemic has showed us the importance of being able to communicate with customers. So to the extent that, a digital format allows utilities and customers to speak to each other, I think that's very important. Obviously, we're seeing advancing in billing systems, but to the extent that there could be advancement in communications, I think that's important as well. With respect to specifically gas, I think as we talk about more advanced metering systems where you have the technology to actually take a look at peak load, peak demand, be able to get a better picture of what's happening out there. I think that is key to some of the integrated planning that we're looking at doing on a go-forward basis. So I think any advancements there that are happening are a good step forward. And given the amount of time we have, I'll leave it there and turn it over to my co-panelists to speak.
All right, thank you very much, Christine. And Annegret, I was going to ask about, you already covered that issue, at least in general terms, but just ask you to finalize about this issue, Do you think cybersecurity concerns will slow down the pace of digitalization in the energy sector?
Thank you. Yes, I touched upon it. As I said, there is, of course, with any digitalization, you have a risk of cyber threats. But I think everyone is aware of this now. And for example, for the networks, there's now a process underway to draft and to approve binding regulations, very detailed regulations on cybersecurity. So we call it network codes for cybersecurity, providing in a very detailed manner all the rules that, in particular, distribution system operators have to observe. Because they have to digitalize more. The transmission network operators are more or less finished their digitalization. The risk is at the end, and also, of course, in relation to the customer premises. And here we need to see that there need to be security by design, security and privacy by design, so that the famous smart home is safe and secure and cannot be cyber attacked. So and that is a very difficult and detailed rules that requires very detailed rules in order to ensure that how the data is transferred in a safe and secure manner. And on the other side, of course, I think that is now being put in place in order not to slow down the digitalization, which is absolutely necessary. As Christine was saying, the pandemic has clearly shown the importance of digitalization, not only for the energy sector, but for the economy as a whole, with remote working and the video conference type that we have. So the whole system has been placed into a virtual mode. And I think that type of smart working will remain. And therefore, it is important to ensure that the digitalization does not increase cybersecurity risks, but that there is a clear rule, that there are clear rules built into the systems by design. Yeah? So that's the objective that we have with creating these cybersecurity network codes. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Annegret. Paul, at ERA, you're normally discussing these kind of issues and these kind of trends at your training conferences and courses. What do you see as the role of regulators in face of ever more digital markets?
Yeah, it is more and on our agendas in general the topic of digitalization. Of course, ERA is not in the driving seat. We are more in a learner mode when it comes to digitalization. But what I see and what was changed during the pandemic is two things. Basically, I think the digitalization in the energy sector was more a policy push, but it changed now because the end consumer now expects its energy utility company that gives the same experience as a telecom company, for example. So it is now a need from the consumer side that it should be more digital, should communicate via video, should be able to pay the bills on the internet. So it's changing, and now the policy push and the demand is meeting. And the second point is that is with the sudden uptake of the intermittent renewables, more flexibility is needed into the systems, and it's clear that the consumer side and the value chain of the energy system close to the consumer side can give a lot of flexibility back to the system, which needs clearly smart appliances that gather a lot of data, communicate to each other, and it's well managed in a systemic way. And it is an untapped potential currently in the systems, and it also became clear for the post-pandemic period that this is a trend, and this is a challenge for the for the whole energy system, and the regulators also how to support it.
Thank you very much, Paul. Jaime, do you see a major use of digital technology as part of the energy transition in Peru? Does Osinermin have a digital transformation strategy to fulfill its functions?
Bueno, antes de la pandemia ya Osinermin
Well,
venía.
before the pandemic, Osinermin was implementing technological solutions like apps to empower the consumers, and carried out pilot projects for a supervision with drones. During the sanitary emergency, Osinermin accelerated its process of digital transformation, making available different tools and mechanisms for the users, considering that the energy services are part of essential activities. Therefore, we had to continue working to guarantee under these new emergency conditions that the energy activities continue occurring with security and that we can rely in a sustainable service. Along the lines of this, we continue the use of drones in the infrastructure of hydrocarbons, in the pipelines of LPG, as well as in the mining industry, serving the guidelines of the healthcare system, as well as the isolation measures that were implemented in Peru. We developed a tool that is important to mention called Verify with Osinermin, which is a real-time platform that allows to identify which places that sell LPG are authorized by Osinermin. This tool was developed by our institution to make it available to the municipal authorities so that they have updated information so that they can conduct their functions to combat informality, which is one of the problems of the country. In general terms, all of these actions that I have summarized are oriented towards guaranteeing the continuity of the processes of supervision, regulation, customer attention at the national level, which become the main functions of our institution, OSINERMIN. Thank you, Francisco.
Thank you very much, Jaime. Finally, John, what about Africa? Energy access is currently at the main focus of energy policies in that region. Do you see an opportunity for digitalization as a tool for both energy access and transition? You've already responded to that in a certain sense, but would you like to add something?
Yes, thank you very much, Francisco. What I would want to say is that, technology has enabled access through payment of bills, like making easy to pay bills. Issues to do with the grid management and dispatch of electricity is being enabled with the technology, issues of licensing, applications. So there is so much for technology to help in digitizing the energy sector in Africa, and also to improve access, and also to ensure that we transition to clean technologies. And there is so much to learn also from our friends from the Europe, from the US, from the South America, and Asia. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, John. And unfortunately, we have no time for further questions. So what I would like to do is just to make a brief summary of some of the very key, some of the very important issues we have discussed. Some of them are very interesting. And so let me start by saying that fortunately, what we're seeing is that this pandemic has brought attention on long-term planning, which is a good thing for energy transition. And we are still seeing some symbolic actions, as Christine mentioned, the Keystone Pipeline, but I would also mention that I understand that Calgary University has closed their programs for petroleum engineering or something like that, which is also a very symbolic action of what's going on in terms of climate change. And we are seeing, the policymakers paying more attention to green transitions. We are seeing that in Europe. We are seeing that in the US. We are seeing that in Canada. We are seeing that in all over the world. Of course, there are some countries which are lagging. There's still some people that prefer to pay more attention on economic growth. But what we have discussed is that there is not a dilemma between economic growth and transition. On the contrary, what we can see is that the economic recovery can be enhanced by moving towards a transition. I mean, we can bring investments, we can create jobs with energy transition. So on the contrary, they are not opposed. They can help us in bringing both things to the table, which is very, very, very important. Now, another thing that we have discussed is the role of regulators. Of course, the regulators have to adapt their role based on what the policymakers do. But even within this framework, they can do a lot, and they can incentivize technology. They can help to avoid distortions. They are not to choose winners and losers in these markets, but they are here to give certainty, of course, to allow new inventions in the market, to allow the development of new technologies. I mean, they are here to reduce barriers, on the contrary of instead of creating barriers of entry. And another thing that I would like to highlight is that contrary to what we could expect, digitalization, it's a good thing, even for regions which are far from having energy access. It's a way to go, not only in terms of bringing new technologies, cleaner technologies, but also it's a good thing for consumers, as John was describing. And finally, what I would like to say is that it's very interesting what we are seeing with natural gas. Of course, in the short run, it's a bridge. It's something that we need. But I mean, in the medium and long run, we have to think into options, and hydrogen is probably one good option. It was very interesting to learn about this trial that it's being taking place. but I think that that's an option that we will probably see in the near future. So, and finally, what I would like to say is that another thing that it's important is that we are seeing that these transition and these policies aim to reduce emissions. Fortunately, they are not only right now on the energy sector. The energy sector is, of course, the primary emitter of greenhouse gases, but transportation is also a very important market where we have to do the work. So I think I mean, we could say a lot of things. I would just like to finish by saying that one of the most important roles of the regulators is bringing certainty. So I think so. Insofar regulators continue doing that, we will see a transition taking place. So. Thank you very much to all of you. I think it was a very interesting discussion. And again, let me congratulate Osinermin for organizing this very interesting conference. And again, congratulations for the Independence Bicentennial. So thank you very much. This comes to an end, and I will leave the word to the organizers. Thank you very much to my fellow panel members.
Muchas gracias a Francisco Salazar, a
Thank
nuestro...
you very much, Francisco Salazar, our moderator for this panel on energy transition in our forum, The Challenges of the Energy Sector After the Pandemic. Thanks to our panel members as well. A very interesting topic is the role of regulators that should promote not just one type of renewable energy, but also oversee that the market is competitive in basically everything regarding renewables, and that the role of consumers should also be much more active. Renewable energy is competitive, especially within different operators, and with the help of the use of technology. So I would like to thank all the participants. Osinermin is especially concerned about bringing good service to the citizenry and keep it informed about their rights as users. So now we will show you a video that talks about the different initiatives of our institution in order to be closer to our users.
Sanitaria exigió tiempos de cambios y mejoras continuas. En Osinermin nunca nos detuvimos e implementamos medidas urgentes para asegurar una adecuada atención de los usuarios en todo el país. Con la habilitación de nuestra ventanilla virtual, se pueden realizar trámites desde cualquier lugar del Perú. También fortalecimos nuestras plataformas de comunicación. Nuestro centro de atención telefónica es 24/7, al igual que el chat institucional, a través de los cuales los usuarios pueden estar en contacto permanente y transmitir sus problemas o sugerencias. El usuario digital también identifica nuestras redes sociales como herramientas aliadas de consultas constantes. Los ciudadanos de zonas alejadas del país también pueden comunicarse con Osinermin y absolver sus dudas, contando con asistencia virtual para este fin. Contamos con personal bilingüe certificado que garantizará la atención adecuada a nuestros usuarios quechua hablantes. También ofrecemos material informativo en quechua y en lenguaje braille para personas con discapacidad visual. Desde hace 10 años, Osinermin apuesta por capacitar y sensibilizar a los más pequeños sobre el buen uso de la electricidad y de los combustibles, tomando con mucha responsabilidad la labor de prevención. Este año realizaremos una nueva edición de los concursos de historietas y cuentos, que involucran también a los educadores. Encontramos en el teatro una magnífica alternativa de comunicar y posicionar mensajes de prevención, con la finalidad de llegar a toda la familia. Nuestro compromiso está enfocado a lograr que se respeten los derechos de los usuarios y que se obtengan mejores servicios, pero también es importante motivarlos a generar cambios de prevención y seguridad. Somos Osinermin, energía que no se detiene.
Muy bien, y ahora cedo la palabra
Very well, so now I will give the floor to Engineer Jaime Mendoza, Chair of the Board of Directors of Osinermin, who would like to thank and close our International Forum Challenges of the Energy Sector After the Pandemic. Engineer Mendoza, you have the floor.
Bueno, como
Thank you. As has been said in this forum, there is still a lot to do in order for the world population to have access to sources of energy. We have emphasized that there is not one single road for energy transition. So the regional realities are pillars for the development of global solutions. That is why it is so important to have platforms such as this. The transformation of the sector is a responsibility that involves all of us, authorities, organizations, and citizens. Even though the pandemic has tested our sector since 2020, climate change, as we see, is a continuous challenge that requires integrated solutions. I reiterate my gratefulness to all the participants, especially the representatives of the different international organizations. Let's remember that we have a new appointment, and that is at the World Forum for Energy Regulation, which will take place in March 2023 in Lima. We are sure that this will be an excellent opportunity to meet again and to address this topic, the challenge of energy transition, competitiveness and sustainability of the energy markets, opportunities and achievements. So thank you all for participating in this event. Thank you for your enthusiasm and for logging from different parts of the world.
In 2023.
Muchísimas gracias,
Thank you
ingeniero.
very much, Engineer Mendoza. Hopefully, we can be together in 2023. We would like to thank all the people that have followed the transmission of our international forum, Challenges of the Energy Sector After the Pandemic. We would like to thank each one of our panelists and the participating organizations, the Ibero-American Association of Energy Regulators, the Organization of Caribbean Utility Regulators, the International Confederation of Energy Regulators, the National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners, the Regional Electricity Regulators Association of South Africa, Canada's Energy and Utility Regulators, the Council of European Energy Regulators, Energy Regulators Regional Association, the Regional Association of Energy Regulators for Eastern and Southern Africa, and the Utilities Regulation and Competition Authority. Thank you very much. Have a great day or evening. Goodbye.